My name is Ethan, and every year, Christmas brings a mix of joy and dread. This holiday isn't just a festive occasion for me. It's a haunting reminder of an incident that forever changed my life. This story isn't one I share often, but I feel like it's time. Maybe you'll believe me, or maybe you'll think it's just another scary story. Either way, it's something I need to get off my chest. Growing up, Christmas was always a big deal in my family. My mom would decorate the house with twinkling lights, and the smell of freshly baked cookies filled every room. My dad's cheesy Christmas sweaters were a tradition, and we'd always watch Home Alone on Christmas Eve. It was picture perfect, until my teenage years. That's when things started to unravel. My parents divorced when I was 15. Mom moved to the city, and Dad stayed in our small town. Christmas, once the happiest time of the year, became a logistical nightmare. I'd spend Christmas Eve with Mom, and then drive to Dad's on Christmas morning. It was exhausting, but it was better than picking sides. When I turned 20, I decided to spend Christmas away from family for the first time. I wanted to make my own traditions with my girlfriend, Lila. She was everything I'd ever wanted, smart, funny, and absolutely stunning. We'd been dating for 2 years, and this Christmas was supposed to be special. I'd rented a cozy cabin in the woods, far from the chaos of the city. Just me, her, and the snow-covered forest. The drive to the cabin was uneventful. Lila and I sang along to Christmas songs, laughing and making plans for the weekend. The cabin itself was perfect, rustic, but with modern amenities, and the view of the snow-blanketed trees was breathtaking. We unpacked, lit a fire, and settled in for a romantic evening. As night fell, the atmosphere changed. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Lila joked that it sounded like a wolf, but her laughter didn't reach her eyes. I shrugged it off, thinking she was just spooked by the isolation. But then came the knock. It was faint at first, barely audible over the crackling fire. I paused, listening. Another knock, louder this time. Who could that be? Lila whispered, clutching my arm. Probably a neighbor, I said, though I wasn't convinced. We hadn't seen another soul since we arrived. I opened the door, and there was no one there. The snow on the porch was undisturbed. Must be the wind, I said, trying to sound confident. But Lila wasn't buying it. The knocking continued throughout the night, always just as we were about to fall asleep. By the third knock, I was too angry to be scared. I stormed outside with a flashlight, determined to catch whoever was messing with us. That's when I saw him. A man stood at the edge of the woods, barely visible in the dim light. He was wearing a tattered coat, and his face was obscured by a scarf and hat. "Hey!" I shouted. "What do you want?" He didn't move, didn't say a word, just stood there staring. I took a step toward him, but Lila's voice stopped me. "Ethan, don't!" she cried from the doorway. When I turned back to the man, he was gone. Just vanished. I searched the area, but there were no footprints in the snow. Lila was shaken, and I couldn't blame her. We spent the rest of the night huddled together, jumping at every sound. Around 3 a.m., she asked me something that caught me off guard. "Ethan, do you believe in ghosts?" I wanted to laugh, but the look on her face stopped me. "I don't know," I admitted. "Why?" She hesitated before answering. "Because I think this has something to do with your past." My heart skipped a beat. Lila knew about my family's history, about the accident. When I was 16, my older brother Daniel died on Christmas Eve. He'd been driving home from a party when his car skidded on black ice and crashed into a tree. I was the one who found him, lifeless and bloody. It was a memory I'd spent years trying to forget. The next day, I couldn't shake Lila's words. Could the strange man have something to do with Daniel? It sounded ridiculous, but the thought gnawed at me. That evening, we decided to build a snowman to lighten the mood. It worked for a while. We laughed and threw snowballs like kids. But as we stepped back to admire our handiwork, my blood ran cold. The snowman's face was different. We'd used buttons for eyes and a carrot for the nose, but now the eyes were empty black holes, and the mouth was a jagged line that looked eerily like a scream. Lila screamed, and I spun around to see the man from the night before, standing just a few feet away. "Who are you?" I demanded. He tilted his head, as if studying me. Then, in a voice that chilled me to my core, he said, "You don't remember me, do you?" Memories flooded back. Daniel's accident, the guilt I'd buried for years. "It's your fault," the man hissed. I staggered back, clutching my head. "No," I whispered. "It was an accident." "You told him to drive," the man said, his voice growing louder. "You dared him to prove he wasn't scared." Lila looked at me, her eyes wide with horror. "Ethan, what is he talking about?" she asked. Tears streamed down my face as the truth spilled out. Daniel and I had fought that night. I'd called him a coward for not wanting to drive in the snow. He'd taken the keys to prove me wrong. The man stepped closer, and I realized who he was. Not a ghost, but something darker. A manifestation of my guilt. "You can't run from this," he said. "Leave him alone," Lila shouted, stepping between us. The man laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. "This isn't about you, girl," he said. But Lila didn't back down. She grabbed my hand, grounding me in the present. "Ethan, look at me," she said. "Whatever this is, it's not real. It's in your head. You can fight it." Her words broke through the fog of fear and guilt. I took a deep breath and faced the man. "You're right," I said. "It was my fault, but I've carried that guilt long enough. It's time to let it go." The man's form began to waver, his features dissolving like smoke. "This isn't over," he whispered, before vanishing into the night. Lila and I left the cabin the next morning. The drive back was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. I didn't tell her everything, but she didn't press. She knew I needed time. That Christmas changed me. It forced me to confront a pain I'd buried for years and reminded me of the importance of forgiveness, of myself and others. Lila stayed by my side, and our relationship grew stronger because of it. To this day, I don't know if what happened was real or just a manifestation of my guilt. But every Christmas, I light a candle for Daniel and remember the lesson I learned that night. The past can haunt you, but it doesn't have to define you.
My name is Jake, and I'm 20 at the moment, and I've never been much of a Christmas person. It's not that I hate the holiday, I just never saw the magic in it. But last Christmas Eve, something happened that changed everything. I'm sharing this story not because I want to, but because I feel like I have to. Maybe someone out there will understand. It all started when I inherited my grandfather's house in the small town of Wintervale. He passed away last fall, leaving behind a creaky, old Victorian home that looked straight out of a Christmas card. I hadn't been to the house in years, not since I was a kid. My mom and I used to visit every December, but after she died, those trips stopped. With no family left, I decided to spend Christmas at the house. It felt right, in a strange way. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was a need to reconnect with the past. Either way, I packed my things and made the drive up. The house was exactly as I remembered it. The tall windows, the ornate woodwork, and the faint smell of pine that seemed to linger in the air. But there was something else too, a feeling I couldn't quite place. It wasn't ominous, but it wasn't comforting either. While unpacking, I found an old music box tucked away in the attic. It was beautifully crafted, with intricate carvings of holly leaves and tiny snowflakes. Inside was a figurine of a woman in a long dress, spinning to a hauntingly familiar tune. I couldn't place the melody, but it sent a chill down my spine. That night, as I sat by the fire, The music box's tune kept playing in my head. It was almost hypnotic. I tried to shake it off, but the sound seemed to follow me, even when the box was closed. I chalked it up to nostalgia and went to bed. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. They were faint but deliberate, echoing through the old house. At first, I thought it might be the creaking of the wooden floors, but as I lay there, listening, I realized it was more than that. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way downstairs. The house was eerily quiet, except for the faint hum of the music box, but I hadn't touched it since putting it back in the attic. When I entered the living room, the box was open, the figurine spinning slowly to that haunting melody. My heart pounded as I reached for it, but before I could close the lid, a voice stopped me. "Leave it!" I froze. The voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it was unmistakable. I turned, my flashlight sweeping the room, but no one was there. Over the next few days, strange things kept happening. Doors creaked open on their own, the lights flickered, and that damn music box. I couldn't get away from it. No matter where I hid it, I'd find it back on the living room table, open and playing its tune. I decided to do some digging. Among my grandfather's belongings, I found an old journal. Most of it was mundane, notes about the weather, shopping lists. But one entry stood out. It was dated December 24th, 1948. "She's still here. The music box won't stop. I thought I could forget, but she won't let me. Christmas used to be her favorite. Now it's a curse." The entry didn't make much sense, but it was clear my grandfather was troubled. I kept reading, piecing together the story. It seemed there was a woman. Clara, he called her. She was his first love, a singer with a voice so beautiful it could bring a room to tears. They'd planned to marry, but tragedy struck. She died in a fire on Christmas Eve, right here in this house. I couldn't shake the feeling that Clara's spirit was tied to the music box. The melody must have been one of her songs, but why was she still here? What did she want? That night, as the clock struck midnight, I decided to confront her. I sat in the living room with the music box in front of me. "Clara," I said, my voice trembling, "if you're here, show yourself." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the room grew colder. My breath fogged the air and the lights dimmed. A figure appeared by the window, faint and shimmering like a reflection on water. She was beautiful, just as my grandfather had described. "Why are you here?" I asked. She didn't speak, but her gaze shifted to the music box. Slowly, I opened it, and the melody filled the room. Clara's lips moved, and though I couldn't hear her, I understood. She wanted to finish her song. I don't know what possessed me, but I started to hum along. The melody came naturally, as if I'd known it all my life. Clara smiled, and her voice joined mine, soft at first, but growing stronger with each note. It was the most beautiful, heart-wrenching sound I'd ever heard. As the song ended, Clara's form began to fade. She looked at me one last time, her eyes full of gratitude, before disappearing completely. The room grew warm again, and the music box fell silent. I spent the rest of the night staring at the music box, trying to process what had happened. When morning came, I felt different, lighter somehow. It was as if Clara's song had lifted a weight I didn't even know I was carrying. I still have the music box, though it hasn't played on its own since that night. Sometimes I'll open it and let the melody fill the room, a reminder of the Christmas I'll never forget. And though I'll never know for sure, I like to think Clara finally found peace. As for me, I've started to see the magic in Christmas again. Because sometimes the past doesn't haunt us to hurt us. Sometimes it just wants to be heard. It just wants to be.
It's strange how some memories cling to you, no matter how hard you try to shake them. My name is Adam, and this is the story of how one Christmas Eve changed my life forever. It's a story of fear, redemption, and a shadow that taught me what it meant to be truly human. Growing up, Christmas wasn't a joyful season for me. My father passed away when I was 10 on Christmas Eve. He'd gone out to pick up a last-minute gift and never came back. An accident on the icy roads. My mother tried her best to make the holiday cheerful, but for me, it became a day of mourning. By the time I reached my 20s, I was bitter and closed off. My girlfriend, Emily, was the only one who saw through my cold exterior. She was patient, always encouraging me to find joy in the little things. But even her warmth couldn't melt the ice in my heart. That year, Emily convinced me to spend Christmas with her family in their cozy cabin in Vermont. I agreed reluctantly, mostly because I didn't want to ruin her holiday. Little did I know, that decision would lead me into the darkest night of my life. The cabin was picture perfect, nestled in a snowy forest with twinkling lights and a roaring fireplace. Emily's family welcomed me warmly, but I felt out of place. After dinner, they all went to bed, leaving Emily and me alone by the fire. We sat there sipping hot cocoa when Emily suddenly turned serious. "Adam," she said, "do you believe in ghosts?" I chuckled nervously. "Not really? Why?" She hesitated before telling me about a local legend, the Shadow of the Pines. According to the story, a man had gone missing in these woods decades ago on Christmas Eve. People claimed to see a dark figure wandering among the trees, searching for something or someone. "Why would you tell me that?" I asked, half laughing, half creeped out. "I don't know," she said with a shrug. "I thought it might make you curious or scared." I rolled my eyes, but deep down, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Around midnight, I woke up to a strange sound, a faint tapping on the window. Emily was fast asleep beside me. Thinking it was just a branch swaying in the wind, I got up to check. But as I approached the window, I saw it, a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the forest, motionless. My heart pounded in my chest. I told myself it was just my imagination, but when I blinked, the figure was gone. The next morning, I tried to shake off the incident, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Emily noticed my unease and asked what was wrong, but I brushed it off. I didn't want to seem weak. That evening, as the family gathered for Christmas carols, the lights flickered. The room grew cold, and the fire in the hearth sputtered. A chill ran down my spine as I glanced toward the window. The shadow was back, closer this time. I couldn't ignore it any longer. After everyone went to bed, I told Emily about what I'd seen. She didn't laugh or call me crazy. Instead, she suggested we go outside and confront whatever it was. "You can't run from your fears forever," she said, her voice steady. Reluctantly, I agreed. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of dread, we stepped into the icy night. The snow crunched under our boots as we made our way toward the spot where I'd seen the figure. The forest was eerily silent. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and died. Panic surged through me, but Emily grabbed my hand. "We're okay," she whispered. That's when we saw it, a tall, shadowy figure looming ahead, its outline darker than the night itself. My instinct screamed at me to run, but Emily's grip kept me grounded. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice trembling. The shadow didn't speak, but it began to move toward us. My fear turned to sheer terror as it raised an arm, pointing at me. In that moment, I remembered my father. The memory of his warm smile and the guilt I'd carried for years overwhelmed me. As the shadow came closer, its form began to shift. It wasn't a ghost or a monster. It was a reflection of my deepest fears and regrets. I realized I wasn't just running from the shadow, I was running from myself. I dropped to my knees, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was apologizing to, my father, Emily, or myself. The shadow stopped. It lingered for a moment before dissolving into the night. The forest grew still again, and the stars seemed brighter than before. Emily knelt beside me, wrapping her arms around me. "You did it," she said softly. The next morning, something had changed. The weight I'd been carrying for years felt lighter. For the first time in my life, I felt at peace. That Christmas marked a turning point. I began to open up, to let go of the bitterness that had consumed me. Over time, I became the kind of man my father would have been proud of, a gentleman, as Emily liked to call me. To this day, I don't know what the shadow truly was. Maybe it was a ghost, or maybe it was a manifestation of my own mind. Either way, it gave me a gift greater than any I'd ever received, the courage to face my fears and embrace the light within me. Every Christmas I return to that cabin with Emily, now my wife, and our children. We tell stories by the fire, and I watch the snow fall with a sense of gratitude. The shadow may be gone, but its lesson remains. Christmas is no longer a time of mourning for me. It's a time of hope, love, and transformation. And every now and then, when I look out at the forest, I swear I see a figure in the distance, watching over me like a guardian.